afternoon. Welcome to UL News. I am Patrick and this is my co-host Rochelle. A few days ago, Egypt took command of the Suez Canal, much to the annoyance of both Britain and France. Israel, as an ally of both Britain and France, invaded Egypt, and shortly thereafter, so did Britain and France. They took control of the canal, and then finally, after pressure from the US, Russia, and the UN, they pulled back their troops. This crisis is going to affect multiple global players. There are multiple factors involved, with France already in a war with Algeria and the Suez Canal company being owned by Britain. How are these shareholders going to be rewarded or compensated? But even more so, what about these power alliances? How is everyone? Now we are going to head over to Gary, our reporter on the ground, to discuss how the Suez Canal crisis has impacted on the Suez Canal company.
Thanks for that. We can see that the Suez crisis has had a massive impact on the Universal Suez Ship Canal Company and almost all activity within the Suez Canal itself. As we know, on the 26th of July, the Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser announced the nationalisation of the Suez Canal Company, along with the closing of the canal to all Israeli shipping. The Suez Canal Company, which was originally founded by Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French former diplomat in 1858, was originally backed by both France and Egypt. However, we can see that the company has been primarily backed by Britain and France together since this point. From its foundation, the Suez Canal Company has been highly influential in the operation of the Suez Canal and was deeply involved in the creation of the canal between 1859 and 1869. Both Britain and France are undoubtedly losing a key strategic point with the loss of control of the Suez Canal Company, and as such, the reactions to the nationalisation of the canal have been extremely strong from all sides affected. While we have gotten news that Nasser has intended to fully compensate the British and French for their loss of the company, it can be seen that the governments of these global powers are genuinely infuriated with the nationalisation. The effects that the nationalisation of the company will have on the current assets and employees are currently unknown, but we can speculate that the assets and employees will most likely be transferred to new operators of the canal. This is unlikely to happen until the near future, but it is clear that the transition between the old operation and new operation will be made much easier and smoother if these things are exchanged. Ultimately, the level of uncertainty and disruption caused from the Suez Canal crisis has created an extremely difficult situation and period for all involved, particularly those with the Suez Canal Company. Realistically, only time will tell what will happen as a result of these actions. Gary Toohey, UL News.
And now over to our British expert in London, Carenton. Carenton, does Britain view an alignment with Europe as a source of weakness?
Despite the military victory of our coalition with France and Israel, it is clear that this event marked the end of an era. There is a sense of humiliation in this crisis for us Europeans. The Egyptian regime may have lost the war, but it triumphed over the notoriety gained, and its success goes well beyond its border. The National Liberation Front in the Algerian conflict is now reinforced against France after what happened in Egypt. Sudan, this condominium of which we share control with the Egyptian, now have access to its independence. The revolution in Iraq, a former vassal of the Occident, allowed the pro-Nasser to take power. Moreover, Lebanon is divided by a civil and religious war, which divide its population between the Christians, favorable to the West, and the Muslim turned toward the Arab world. The European powers have lost their authority in this region of the world. I don't know if we can speak about weakness, but it's true that aligning ourselves with the rest of Europe only in the Middle East affairs is clearly no longer conceivable.
Okay, Carenton, I have another question. Does Britain rely too heavily on America?
I will not say that we depend heavily on America, but American and Soviet involvement in this crisis showed that the colonial era in this region of the world was over for us. From now on, we have seen that Egypt was strongly supported by the Soviets, who have a tenacious hatred of our colonial past. In this situation, it's easy to understand that politics in this region will not happen without these two blocs, which polarize the world from now on. To side with the United States was therefore inescapable. Nevertheless, if you consider this alliance that we have with the United States as a dependence to them, You may be right. It is true that our relationship with the Americans is much less tense than the relationship that they have with France, which is much more contentious. And in this case, yeah, yes, we depend on America.
Okay, Coronton, and I have one final question for you. In your opinion, what kind of sanctions will the US impose on Britain?
Before the Soviet threatened our coalition, the Americans were rather passive in this conflict. But after that, they required the calling off of our troops in order to defuse the conflict. They put pressure on our economy through a monetary attack aimed at devaluing our pound sterling. Moreover, the Americans sent their naval and air force interfering in the military device that was maintained with France. That's why we had to call our troops immediately, even before warning the French.
With us on the phone today is United States reporter Alyssa Knight, who's with us to talk about the recent development found regarding the United States' involvement in the Suez Canal crisis. Hello, Alyssa.
Hello, Rochelle. As you said, I am Alyssa Knight, and I am currently reporting from the United States. The Suez Canal crisis has ended, but some new information about the U.S. involvement, or lack of, has surfaced. Letters written between the U.S. President Eisenhower and Prime Minister Eden show that they had polar ideas on how to handle the crisis. We know that the U.S. did not want a war to break out, but now we can see the exact words exchanged regarding the crisis. On July 29, 1956, Prime Minister Eden personally sent a letter to the U.S. President where he argued that they needed to take a firm stand and, quote, "If we do not, our influence and yours throughout the Middle East will, we are convinced, be irretrievably undermined," end quote. The Prime Minister tried to appeal to the threat this caused to the U.S. influence and specifically the effect on oil supplies in the Middle East. The Prime Minister believed force was the greatest way to show the power of Britain and its allies. President Eisenhower, however, recounted this letter by saying, quote, "For my part, I cannot overemphasize the strength of my conviction that some such method must be attempted before action, such as you contemplate, should be undertaken." End quote. President Eisenhower then goes on to talk about the reason he feels it is unnecessary to go to war by saying, quote, "Public opinion here, and I am convinced, in most of the world, would be outraged should there be a failure to make such efforts. Moreover, initial military successes might be easy, but the eventual price might become far too heavy." End quote. As we saw throughout the crisis, President Eisenhower and his team pressured both Britain and France to cease fire, but as that did not work, they voted for a UN peacekeeping force. We will have to wait and see if this will hurt U.S. relations with these powerful allies, but with these letters surfacing, we can already clearly see Prime Minister Eden's intention the entire time and how President Eisenhower worked in the background to keep the United States from joining the crisis and keeping peace on the home front. Thank you for having me on the phone today. Back to you.
And now over to our reporter Tomo.
Before the Suez Canal crisis, the French government saw in this crisis an opportunity to attack Nasser, who was the source and origin of problems in Algeria because he's anti-colonialist and nationalist and supported the Algerian National Liberation Front. There is another issue for the French government and Guy Mollet, the French Prime Minister. The socialist government was considered as soft. In France, political opinion was almost for vigorous action, except for the communists. The problem consisted to assure French people that a socialist government can have authority and keep the leadership during a crisis. Obviously, the government failed under the US and Soviet pressure. Moreover, during a meeting in London with the British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, Guy Mollet offered to the British ministers the idea of creating a union between French and British empires, offer made by Winston Churchill during the Second World War. British ministers were hostile, arguing if this union is created, British Empire would inherit French unpopularity in the Middle East. In the end, France was unhappy about the British failure under American pressure, and the alliance between France and Great Britain was weak. Moreover, the alliance between France and Israel was stronger by this crisis, and in France, the idea of being more independent of United States and developing new weapons, such as nuclear weapons, in order to protect the country against every potential threat began to emerge.
Now we're going to speak to a number of experts who will give us their country's opinion surrounding the crisis. Hi, this is Margot Hughes, our American expert. Margot, could we ask you a few questions?
Yeah.
Do you think it was a good decision that Eisenhower warned the Israeli, French, and British forces to withdraw?
I do believe it was a good decision that Eisenhower made such warnings to the British, Israeli, and French force, because if they chose to continue their fight, it would have led to serious economic consequences and sanctions. Also, if they continued their campaign, Russia was threatening them with nuclear war. So I believe that the threats and warnings made by Eisenhower were key reasons why the Suez Canal came to an end.
Right. What opinions do the American people have regarding the Suez Canal crisis?
The Americans believe that this is a total mess and could have been prevented if the Israeli, British, and French forces listened to Eisenhower's advice on invading Egypt. The crisis has led to possible involvement of the Soviet Union, which worries the American people. They believe that President Eisenhower will be the hero in the end and will help resolve the crisis.
We're here with Joe, who's a resident Egypt expert. And first of all, Joe, how are people feeling in Egypt at the resolution of this crisis?
The Egyptian people are ecstatic. They're so happy that our courageous President Nasser stood up to the Western imperialist powers and Israel. It was completely within Nasser's right to do everything he did.
Okay. In retrospect, was the nationalisation of the canal a good idea?
I think it was a great idea. It was completely within Nasser's right to nationalize an Egyptian company on Egyptian soil with the Egyptian canal. He stood up to Western imperialism and protected Egyptian sovereignty.
From Russia.
Добрый день.
Does the fact that Russia is becoming an influential player in this crisis mean that it can now be considered a big player on the international relations scene?
Well, we are certainly big influence to the world now, and I think we always have been. But today, it is one more proof that the Western world cannot rule us all.
Why are Russia aligning with the Arab nations? Is it a riposte against the old colonial ideologies of imperialist France and Britain?
USSR has always been the friend of oppressed nations that are suffering from Western imperialism. What those European countries were trying to achieve with Israel was nothing more than colonialism. And we despise colonialism, taking over countries' land and resources for yourself and leaving nothing behind. That is not compatible with communism, and this is not something we would support. You won't find anyone telling you otherwise from Berlin to Vladivostok, unless maybe in gulags, but who really cares about that? Now, Egypt is the most recent example of what capitalists think they can do, but today it has to stop. That is why we are here. We have been protecting those countries, helping them by developing technology, giving them the necessary resources. Mostly military technology, yes, but you have to start somewhere, right? Today it is tanks and bombs, tomorrow it will be agriculture, don't worry. We don't have time to do everything immediately. And those threats have been successful. Even though NATO has said that any nuclear attacks would be punished by an immediate nuclear riposte, European countries are starting to back up. We have also asked Israel to come back to its original 1949 frontiers and give back the land it has conquered. It's mostly sand, but still it's symbolic. The United Nations emergency forces are supposed to come and replace European forces starting from the 15th of November. So you see, nukes are good diplomatic solutions.
Why doesn't Russia just concentrate on the uprising in Hungary?
Well, the crisis will be easily dealt with. We know that Western media likes to exaggerate the impact of the movements in order to destabilize our politics. But the rising in Hungary is way smaller than what Americans say it is. The numbers I have heard are astonishing. On the 23rd of October, it is said that 20,000 people would have apparently started the protest. Then the numbers would rise to 200,000 by the evening. This is absurd. Now, calm is almost back. We don't need to focus our whole attention on it. And we have tanks. Tanks is good.
Thanks for your perspective.
We have our French expert, Pauline, and I just have a couple of questions for you, okay? What is the French feeling about the Suez crisis?
So, since the beginning of the crisis, France claims that the Egypt was allied with Algeria. In fact, since 1954, the French government was fighting in Algeria against the Algerian National Liberation Front, which asked for independence. Qualified as the dictator by the President Guy Mollet in 1956, but also compared with Hitler in the French newspaper, Nasser supported the Algerian separatist movement. In this way, France was clearly opposed to the nationalization of the Suez Canal. Indeed, for the French government, the freedom of movement in the Suez Canal is a question of life or death. However, this crisis seems to divide the French people. Indeed, the French Communist Party recounts that this war has for only purpose to destroy the Algerian population and its liberation movement. According to them, in assaulting Egypt, it will be a way to put an end to the Algerian resistance. Moreover, in 1957, France faced up to an oil shortage. In fact, its oil provision from the Middle East were threatened. That's why the French government decided to set up oil-free cards. This crisis put France in a problematic diplomatic situation.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And I have one further question for you. In your own opinion, which do you think is more serious, the Suez Canal crisis or the Algerian Revolution?
I think that the majority of the French population is very centered in the Algerian conflict because it's touched the French population itself, but the other crisis, of course, is very important.
But not as important, in your opinion, as the Algerian?
I think so, yes.
Thank you very much, Pauline.
Well, we've heard a few perspectives on this crisis now. Israel invaded Egypt, followed by the UK and France following Israel into Egypt. The US, Russia, and the UN warned Britain not to invade, and when Britain didn't listen, they put pressure on the invading countries to pull the troops out. Britain, France, and Israel left the canal, leaving Britain in a now precarious situation, and we narrowly missed a war with all of the threats being delivered. This is an intricate and controversial situation, so we'll see how this plays out and what will happen now on a global scale. That's all.